What is up, people? Welcome back to the show, Donuts and Chai with your boy Wajih and Raza. Week 5. It was a great week 4, but now we're in week 5. Have a lot of stuff to talk about, and gonna jump right into it with the matchups of the week. Raza, what matchups did you like this week?
This week's matchups were pretty good. I feel like we had quite a few that were very close scoring, at least for most of the week. Um, I myself included, I was in a really close matchup, but the matchup of the week, at least for my end, was the matchup between Sadik, who is now unfortunately 1-3, versus Peanut for Prez, who is a boss. They had a 1 point close matchup affair, 125 to 126, the
Very
final
close.
score. Yeah. Um, it was very unfortunate. Salik looked like he was probably going to pull out a win. He had Brandon Ayuk going into the Monday Night Football game, but unfortunately, he was playing against Jeff Wilson, who had to break away a 35-yard touchdown
Um,
to nail in his coffin to end his week. So, I mean, it was a really good matchup. It might not have been the highest scoring, but it was a really close affair, and I feel like a lot of the matchups were like that this week. If Wedgie wants to go into one of the other ones, he's feel free to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the point of like that was like one of the closest matchups of the week, if not the closest. But it was like kind of low scoring in the 120 range. Whereas I feel a matchup that you were in where was very high scoring, and actually was the highest scoring matchup of the week. So Amar and Raza's is the next matchup for
Two
our
weeks in
matchup
a
of the
row,
week.
man. 2 weeks in
Yeah,
a
2 weeks in a
row.
row, we're grilling you. But the total was 162 to 159, give or take some decimal places there. And yeah, 2 weeks in a row where Raza has lost by a very small margin. But this was a great game. Both players on each side kind of blew up. Miles Sanders for Raza had 31 points, but that was kind of matched by Mike Evans' 30-point game from Amar's team. I think the difference was definitely TJ Hawkinson, which we'll get into a little bit later, but his 40-point game was just ridiculous. And like he set records in Lions history and all that. So um, those 30-point performances from Mahomes and Hawkinson and Evans really put Amar over the top by that small margin over Reza. But that's pretty much it from in terms of the matchups of the week. In terms of some of the studs that performed, I want to talk about Austin Eckler, my boy, traded for him. Finally came to fruition. 2 touchdowns, I think 60 some
I think
yards,
he had three, bro.
3 touchdowns.
Yeah, he had
Oh yeah,
one receiving and
reception
two.
touchdown. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
reception touchdown. 6 receptions, which is huge. I think with Austin Eckler, the only way he was going to be good is because it is if Justin Herbert was good and Justin Herbert was healthy. So his value was tied to Justin Herbert, and thank God Herbert's okay. Another running back that popped off was Dameon Pierce. He had 131 yards and a tutty, as well as 6 receptions, just like my boy Austin Eckler. And just it's nice to see that Dameon Pierce is getting that workload. He had that hype throughout preseason and the off season, so he's just a monster on the ground. And then the receiving work on top of that is huge. I didn't think he would get that receiving work just because Rex Burkhead is there, but he is. And although it was only for like 6 or 8 yards, something like that, his receptions, he's still getting the looks from Davis Mills. So that's very reassuring to see from David Pierce.
Yeah, dude. He's like a really hard runner. Like he runs super hard and he has
Yeah,
some quick burst in terms of his jukes. So like yeah, the preseason hype was worth it, to be honest.
100%.
Yeah, going into some people that I want to highlight for the studs. I gotta go with my boy Jared Goff. I mean, the entire season he's just
Let's
been
go.
going insane. 378 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. I think this game had like almost 100 total points scored, which is like insane. They're just like the Lions defense is completely washed. they can't guard a parked car. And yeah, like you mentioned earlier with my matchup, uh, TJ Hawkinson, also another stud. He went berserk.
Dude, that
Um,
Lions offense. Wow.
yeah, and they were missing their two best players, Amon-Ra St. Brown and DeAndre Swift, and it didn't seem like it really mattered, right?
Swift too. I forgot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Hawkinson, just to tell you his line, he had 8 receptions for 179 yards, 2 touchdowns. He
Ooh.
also added a 1 2 point conversion as well. So I mean, he was super clutch for their team. Not just for the Lions, he was also super clutch for Amar because he had to go over top against my team. One other person I also wanted to give a mention and a shout out to is Josh Jacobs. He had 28
Stud, bro.
attempts. Excuse me. He had 28 attempts with 104 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And going into the season, I feel like all of us were kind of low on him with like all the reports that were coming out with like Zamir White and all this discussion of like they're not picking up his options, so he's going to be gone after this season. But I found it really awesome that Ali Rizvi took the risk on him, and it's starting to come to fruition to a certain degree. And let's see if he can continue with this performance.
Yeah. I think like big shout out to Ali Rizvi for like sticking through to Josh Jacobs, especially just a couple weeks ago we were mentioning that he took the wide receiver or wide receiver heavy strat. So going with Josh Jacobs, falling to I think like what was it, the 5th or 6th round, something like that, and getting him and then hitting on him this week, it's definitely a good sign for his team. And then he has a huge matchup against me this week, so we'll see how Josh Jacobs performs there as well.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, let's just jump into the duds then for this week. It was pretty high scoring week for the most part, so it's kind of hard to decide and find some good people to think of. But the first person that came to mind for me for duds was Gabe Davis, with a stat line of 1 reception for 13 yards. I do get that he was playing through injury.
Injured, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Wajih was telling me he's playing through injury. Yeah, so I remember he had like his ankle injury. Even then, he was still playing pretty much all the snaps, even more than Stephon Diggs from last week. And even this week, I think he had like relatively the same number of snaps as Stephon Diggs. So, I mean, there's not too much of an excuse. He was going into this season with so much hype. Like, I was expecting more, honestly. And, like, so far, he really hasn't done much. So, I mean, he's someone I want to highlight for this week and also, the past few weeks since we're now at the quarter of the season.
Yeah.
The other person,
in terms, or before you jump to your other person,
yeah.
In terms of like that Bills offense, at least I've noticed just being a Diggs owner is that Diggs hasn't really been popping off either. I think the dude that's popping off in that offense is Isaiah McKenzie.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel that's like those quick short throws that Josh Allen is throwing, he's not like looking at Gabe Davis or Diggs on those quick throws. And then the deep throws, of course, he's looking at those too. But
for sure.
That's what I've seen in the games.
Yeah, for sure. To add to that, Allen is also targeting the running backs a lot more than he has in years past, and he's like spreading the ball more. So like,
that's fair.
Yeah. He's still like I remember against the Dolphins, he threw it like 58 times. So like he's still throwing it a lot, and the targets are still there. But it's spread around a little bit more. Yeah, that makes sense. Isaiah McKenzie, let's see if he plays this week. I think he has a concussion or something. But anyways, my second person I wanted to highlight was a highly touted tight end that Salik is a huge fan of, Mark Andrews. We were expecting a lot more from Mark Andrews against the Bills. We were expecting a really high-scoring game. He just did not perform for some reason. He only had 2 receptions for 15 yards. The Bills' defense is really good, but they were missing some pieces on their end. But it was pretty surprising to me that he put up a 3.5 PPR points. So big dud in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I also think that Lamar is definitely he looks to the outside more for some reason this year. Previous years, it's been like Mark Andrews is his guy, and first couple of weeks I feel like he was, but I guess last game he just was looking in the middle. And you said they were playing Buffalo, right?
Yeah, they were playing Buffalo.
Does Buffalo have a good like linebacking core?
Yeah, they have. I think his name's Tremont Edmonds, like the dude with
Oh
the
yeah,
big dreadlocks. He's a
yep, yep,
huge.
yep.
That guy's
And
really good.
they have Micah Hyde from the Packers, right? In
Yeah,
terms of safety.
I think he's injured though. But like their
Oh, he's
defense
injured.
overall is like really good as a unit.
Yeah, maybe they just shut down Mark Andrews and we're just overlooking it, and it's a dud for this week. I think another tight end that was very not performing to his value was George Kittle. Yeah, I put it in the chat a couple of days ago where the past 7 games he hasn't exceeded 30 yards receiving, and everyone's like, "Oh, he'll go over," and then boom, like 24 yards receiving. Even if he caught that touchdown, I know he was out of bounds on one touchdown. If you caught that touchdown, he still would have been sub 30 yards. So it's kind of the panic button on George Kittle, where in terms of Kyle Shanahan's game plan, like he's just not in it. Maybe that'll change. I know he's best friends with Jimmy.
Yeah,
So
people usually, just to add quickly, people usually say like he's not really running that many routes or getting targets because he's in the blocking a lot more. But in this
yeah,
game, that wasn't the case. Like he wasn't blocking as much as he usually does. He just
yeah,
wasn't getting the targets either.
yeah, very true. I feel like, yeah, in order for Jimmy to be successful and the 49ers, George Kittle's a big part of that. So they need to like unlock him sooner rather than later. I think another dud is, I'm sorry to say this, Raza, but Deontay Johnson. I don't know. In years past, I've owned Deontay Johnson, and he's kind of like Mr. Reliable, old reliable. Like he gets that 12-point floor, and then he has the upside of a touchdown. Now, granted, Kenny Pickett came to the game and threw 3 picks or something like that, and showed that connection with George Pickens. But I still think Deontay Johnson, like this, that was a very underwhelming performance with a better quarterback at the helm. But hopefully they get those reps in, and they're better next week. But I still think it's looking up for Deontay Johnson for sure. I wanted to also kind of get into a new segment of our podcast. I pitched this to Reza the other day, and we kind of discussed it. We kind of like this segment of Fool's Gold players. We're a quarter way into our season, and we're just looking at all the players that are gaining hype and are performing up until this point, and we want to either like press the pause button on them or kind of say that, hey, they're Fool's Gold. So some of the players that I see are Fool's Gold, in my opinion. One is Antonio Gibson. I think this is not really a huge, like bold take. Rather, Brian Robinson, the dude that got shot, he's coming back next week. It's so bad to laugh at that, but
Why'd you mention he got shot?
it is funny. I mean, dude,
Yeah.
the Brian Robinson, like everyone knows Brian Robinson. Oh yeah, the guy that got shot.
Yeah.
But I guess the way that I said it wasn't very serious either. But he's coming back. He won the job over Antonio Gibson in off-season training camp, so there's no reason why he can't do it again. And he's looking really good. So I think Fool's Gold, Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson's going to come and take over that job. Another Fool's Gold player that I feel that I want to hit the pause button on, and this may be a bold take, is Darren Waller. I'm curious to see like your opinions on my take, but Darren Waller, I just feel their offense is not catering towards Darren Waller anymore. They want to run the ball more, as you saw last week. They want to feed Devontae Adams and feed the other players, and Darren Waller is not getting as much volume as he once did.
Yeah. I haven't been watching too many Raiders games, so I agree with your comments. I've also noticed that they like, just looking at the stats for Josh Jacobs, like I think he not only had those 28 attempts this last game, for example, he also had like 5 or 6 targets. So that's like 32 opportunities. So I think
Yeah,
it's like it's skewing the numbers to where like Waller isn't even getting any targets in this offense. So I get it. I mean, it seems like from the games I've watched too, he's not getting as open as he normally would, or they're just not scheming for him. So it totally makes sense that you're hitting the pause button on him. It really just depends on if the coaching staff realizes to scheme him in more and realize
yeah,
that he can help them win. So I definitely agree with hitting the pause button on him. And yeah, quick comment on Gibson. Like I've also noticed they're like for some reason they're already starting to reduce his snap count. Like
Yeah.
just to prepare for Brian Robinson, I guess, dude. So yeah, I totally agree. He's complete fool's gold, and hopping into just someone I believe is just the the complete definition of fool's gold
Yeah.
is Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Oh, wow.
This guy,
I
yeah, he's a
completely agree with that.
first rounder. I mean, like touted after like 2 years ago, he was like a first round pick in fantasy too. Like, I just feel like this season, he really seems like fool's gold because he's not really putting up crazy stats, but he does have 3 receiving touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns, which is kind of elevating like his fantasy output for the last few weeks. So I feel like that's a big contributor, as well as the fact that we can now see that Isaiah Pacheco is starting to slowly eat into his role. Like something they discussed on the commentary from that last game was that um the way Pacheco is running, it's he's running so hard that it's causing Clyde Edwards-Helaire to like have to push harder and try to be a better player. Even though he was
Yeah.
playing at a high clip and playing well, it's very touchdown dependent, and I just feel like it's fool's gold and it's not gonna last. I'm curious to see if you agree or what you think about that as well.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. CEH is definitely fool's gold. He's just like right right time, right place, type of player where he's in the game when they scheme up something and then the running back, goes into the flat, no one's open. Okay. Or no one's open, pass to CEH, boom, touchdown. I also think like a great point. I love that you mentioned Pacheco. Isaiah Pacheco is just such a better runner than a CEH. Like CEH out of the backfield, sure, like he's an okay
Dude,
receiving back.
one thing I just thought of? I feel like Isaiah Pacheco reminds me of a young LeGarrette Blunt.
Ooh,
Do you know what I
I
mean?
like that.
Like
Yeah,
he's a hard runner and he's not afraid to go through the tackles and like take hits.
yeah, yeah. He's between the tackle. He likes that contact. Feeds off of like other people's tackles. I think he had like a lot of broken tackles in college too. So yeah, I could definitely see that comparison. I like that. I like that player comp. But yeah, I definitely think CEH is definitely a dud. I think moving on to not only just a player dud, but also a team dud, in my opinion. Maybe you agree with it. Are the
Complete fool's
Eagles,
gold, huh?
bro? I just complete fool's gold, like you just said, bro. I think Eagles are good. Don't get me wrong; they're 4-0. They're the only undefeated team. But I just feel like they're the type of team, kind of like the Eagles previously, even, or the Arizona Cardinals, where they would go, have a great season, then go to the playoffs, and then just lose to a really good team. And you look at their schedule. You can pull out the game log right now while you're watching the podcast, walking to class or work or wherever you are, and you can look at their upcoming schedule and you will see that all the teams are very beatable. There's no question of like, oh, I'm not sure if they'll lose this game. I think Arizona Cardinals they're playing this week. That may be the hardest matchup of the whole
And the Arizona Cardinals look like trash. So
season.
that's
I know.
yeah. I agree, dude. I feel like maybe not to the extent that you do. I do think they've taken like quite a few steps forward.
Yeah,
For like
that's fair.
especially with the moves they've made in the offseason on both defense and offense. Like getting AJ Brown was huge for them. It's like really opened up their offense. I do agree that their schedule has been really easy, but they are destroying those teams that they're playing. It's not like they're beating them by like low clips. However, I do think to a certain degree, I wouldn't consider them like fully fool's gold. If we had to put it on like scale of 1 to 10, for 10 being fool's gold, I'll probably put
Yeah,
them at like a 5 or 6 currently, because
yeah,
I
that's
do
fair.
feel like if they were to play one of those good teams, they'd have more of a chance compared to last year. Like when they played the Bucks last year, they had no chance. Like it was pretty obvious they were just
Yeah,
outmatched and out like
that's fair.
they had no chance. This year, however, I do think they're one of those contender teams. Like they have a chance if they play their cards right, because they have really good players, really athletic players. So yeah, um, that's my take on it. But jumping into another part, another not segment, I should say, but essentially we wanted to also add in to talk about some of the teams that we think are the biggest contenders, both from the AFC and the NFC. So me and Wajih have taken the time to think about some teams on our own. Um, and yeah, let's actually start with Wajih to discuss his tier list for the NFC, and I can give my take on if I agree or what I think the case is for each of the teams that we're gonna mention. So we're gonna keep it kind of short. So we're gonna talk about like maybe two or three teams. So go ahead, Wajih.
Yeah, sure. In terms of NFC, like it's hard, bro. It's wide open. We kind of had like a 1 hour discussion before this call, me and Raza, about the NFC, and it's completely wide open. Of course, talking about the Eagles, like they are an undefeated team. I don't see them going all the way. I see a team like the Packers or the Bucks going all the way. Of course, I'm biased to the pick of the 49ers as well. But I really think that 49ers defense is just lights freaking out, bro. Like they're one of the best, if not the best defense in the whole league. From top to bottom, they're like great. So
So quick question: would you rank them as your number one team from the NFC currently?
I wouldn't just because the offense has some questions. I think my number one team in the NFC right now, it's a tough one because it's a toss up. I would say as of right now, in terms of their play, Eagles. Now I don't like them long term, but I would say that they're at number one. Maybe number two spot is Bucks, and then number three spot is um, Packers, and then 49ers at the fourth. That's kind of how it's shaping out in my head. But honestly, it's wide open. Like the Vikings can make a run for all I know. So it's random in the NFC. But AFC is pretty structured in the sense that there's the top three or four teams, and like kind of what are your picks in terms of those rankings?
Yeah, AFC. I think it's a little bit more set in stone compared to the NFC. I totally agree. The NFC, it's like wide open. Any team can really come out and just win this. But yeah, AFC. If I had to put it in an order, I gotta stick with what I said in our pre start of the season podcast. In that, I think the Chiefs are still the number one team. They've kind of proved it with how they destroyed the Bucks this last week, and I just feel like Mahomes is just like people are getting tired of him, but I still think he's the best quarterback in the NFL right now. Just in terms of pure
Mhm.
talent and like how to read the field. Um, I don't know if you necessarily agree, but we could just to quickly mention my other two teams. I have the Bills at number two. I'd consider them a really close number two.
Okay.
Their team overall, I feel, is just completely complete. There's nothing they're really lacking in. And then the number three team, surprisingly, I ended up thinking of was the Dolphins. I just feel like their team looks very good, and adding two complete speedy wide receivers just opens up the field so much for them. And their defense is playing at a pretty high level too, for the most part. So I just feel like, yeah, that makes up what I think so far, at least quarter through the season.
Dude, I think, and this may be like a very, very bold, um, maybe not the best right now, but I think like if we're at the end of the season, I genuinely think that the Jacksonville Jaguars
Oh,
will be better than the Miami Dolphins at the end of
oh.
the season. That's a super bold prediction, I know.
I don't know if it's bold, but it's a good one.
Bro, the defense is very good. They just got Trayvon Walker from the draft last year. Their cornerback, linebackers, safety,
Their one linebacker they also got in the first round is really nice too. Like he
yeah, I forget
destroyed
his
the
name,
Chargers.
but
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but yeah.
yeah, Jaguars defense is good. And then as we've seen, like it's producing in terms of fantasy, their offense. Trevor Lawrence is just throwing darts to Christian Kirk. James Robinson is like RB1. If he doesn't work out, they have Travis Etienne. Like, dude, their offense is quite loaded. And I really like them in the AFC, not to win it all, but definitely a top five team for sure.
A sneaky lightning bolt in a bottle team,
Yeah,
I guess.
exactly.
For sure. Yeah. Um yeah, just keeping track of time. I guess we'll move on to our last segment, which is
Drum
our
roll.
fan favorite, Shaqtin' a Fool. All
You
right.
see,
So going into this week, it was very high scoring and close matchups, but unfortunately for this manager, that was not the case. Drum roll, please. Our man is Daniel Mirza. Okay,
Hey,
Mr.
let's
Unlimited.
go.
Coming in at a total whopping, let me see here. Let's pull up the numbers.
Sorry, Daniel, I had to do it to you.
He had 92 total points scored, I believe, and
96.
96. And the week didn't start off very well for him. Having Alvin Kamara early London game as a late scratch. He just couldn't recover from that, especially leaving Clyde Edwards-Helaire on his bench with the 23 or so points.
Heart-wrenching.
It just seemed like facing Wajih, who's just, his team seems like a powerhouse. It was like David versus Goliath in this instance, and he just did not seem to stand a chance. Not even cracking the 100 mark. His team just seems like it's completely barred with injuries, and let's see if Keenan Allen can come back and maybe save his team, because he went from one of the higher scorers in our league to closer to the bottom half. So, let's see if his team can step it up this next week and maybe pull out a much needed win.
Yeah, it's actually a funny story with this matchup. I stayed up like all night for a majlis, and I got back home at 6 a.m. So like no sleep, ready to go to sleep, and like the 6:30 matchup start, and I stay up for 30 minutes just updating my Yahoo Fantasy app, just praying that like this man doesn't have an alarm at 6:29 to fix his lineup. And then 6:30 hit, and I was like, oh, I can sleep now, because Kamara's in the game, out. So sorry for praying.
Since you were awake, I wasn't awake. Was there a report that said he was out like before?
No, there was a report at like 5 a.m. saying that Kamara is like a unexpected like inactive.
Oh,
I was like 5 a.m. Jesus, like there's no way anyone knows this. And I picked up Mark Ingram too, just in case he did see it. I picked up Mark Ingram and started him, but he didn't do well. But yeah, I think Daniel will definitely bounce back from this matchup. He has Brian Robinson, George Pickens on his bench, so those are two good players. Keenan Allen as well. But yeah, that sums it up for our Shaqtin the Fool and our show for Week 4's recap going into Week 5. Thank you for joining us. We will also be reaching out to one lucky member of the Fantasy Football League to potentially join our show for next week. So please stay tuned, and we will see you next week. See you guys later. Peace.